Hello and welcome to Sideshow. The Kickstarter for our tabletop board game, Court of the Dead, Mourner's Call, has just gone live on Kickstarter. Woo. We're very excited about that. About 40% of the way funded so far. If you want to check out the details of that game, you can go to sideshow.com/Kickstarter. Once again, that's sideshow.com/Kickstarter to check out the Court of the Dead, Mourner's Call board game for some deeper details. But I'm here today and we'll be live streaming throughout the day with Tom Gilliland, Chief Creative Officer of Sideshow and creator of Court of the Dead, and Pat Marino from Project Raygun, who's actually producing the Kickstarter. Pat was the key designer on the game itself, and so we'll be doing some Q&A with the creator and the designer throughout the day so you can get a deeper look at the mythology and the world of the Court of the Dead and how that was integrated into the gameplay and mechanics. So Tom, can you please tell us a little bit about what is the Court of the Dead and what are some of the primary conflicts in the universe?
So Court of the Dead is a dark fantasy parable about how, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And in order to illustrate that, it sort of centers on the celestial kingdom, which is split into heaven and hell, sort of two sides of the same vile coin. Both are equally corrupt as they pursue a sort of endless and ongoing war for nothing other than just supremacy. And what drives their war is this sort of ethereal element, which is kind of the spark of creation or whatnot, or the driving engine that lets their war continue. The issue, though, is that their realm is deprived of it now. But where it is rich is in the mortal realm, hidden within mortal souls. So in order to mine or to acquire this, they've tasked Death in his underworld, a sort of lonely demigod or whatnot, with the purpose of harvesting mortal souls to draw this etheria and deliver it to the split kingdoms or whatnot so they can continue on their mission of destroying one another. But in that process, Death slowly becomes more and more compelled by the plight of the mortal realm and starts to see the parallels to the sort of refugee elements that sort of cascade into his underworld that sort of fall out from this great war, and realizes that he's in a position to do something about it and feels compelled to do so because of his complicits in this process. So he sets about building the Court of the Dead, which is a cast of heroes and entities that he has forged, partially from himself, as sort of reflections of his own different aspects, as a means to kind of harness power and build a sort of subversive rebellion. His idea being that if he can build this, capture the power, slowly but surely work under the radar, that he can turn this whole engine upside down on the celestial kingdom and bring them to heel and bring a balance back to the universe that will help set the mortal realm, the underworld, and the celestial realm in a proper alignment. Wow, that is an incredibly deep mythology. Got through that one.
And so for those of you who aren't familiar with Sideshow, we're a world-renowned collectibles company, and the Court of the Dead actually has a library of statues and publishing that explores this world and mythology. We're actually going to, in a little bit, give away a Chronicle of the Underworld, which delves into much deeper detail, kind of the storyline that Tom just laid out for us. But I'd like to switch gears and bring Pat in on this conversation, because he really worked with Tom to take that story and weave that into a game experience. And I think if it'd be possible if we could switch to a top-down view so we could kind of reference some of the stuff that Pat will be talking about here. This is Court of the Dead, Mourner's Call. And Pat, could you actually start off by telling us a little bit about who is Project Raygun and what you guys are about? They are a licensee of Sideshow for Court of the Dead, and we worked with them pretty much through all of last year to design this game. But can you tell us a little bit about Project Raygun before you jump into how you took Tom's story and made that part of the board game?
Sure. So Project Raygun is a division of USAopoly, which is a game company that's been around for over 20 years now, and really specializes in doing licensed games, taking intellectual properties and bringing games to market. Project Raygun takes that experience much deeper into the hobby gaming space, and so about a year ago we released The Thing: Infection at Outpost 31, based on
a really fun game,
the John Carpenter movie, and that creates that sort of paranoia experience, right, in that game. So with Court of the Dead, we just felt like it was a really good fit for Project Raygun to be able to go a little more into the strategy realm, premium components, all this fantastic artwork. It just felt like within our larger company, that was the brand that fit this game best, and could really do the story justice.
Let's talk a little bit about the board game.
Yeah, so here's the game board here we have set up on the table. This is a prototype copy for those who are following the Kickstarter. So this is a handmade and 3D printed version that we put together in our office. So it's not really quite what you're going to get in the final, but the artwork is there. And what we wanted to do with this game was tell that big story, right? Is introduce new people to the Court of the Dead, and then also give fans an opportunity to experience what this world is all about. And the center of that is this sort of cooperative, competitive struggle. So we have the two tracks here, the Celestial Suspicion and the Dread Script on the two sides. And Celestial Suspicion deals with, as we're collaborating to build our forces, heaven and hell are going to take notice if we're not careful. So all players have to collectively manage this meter to keep it low, and the higher it gets, the more of that etheria they're going to have to funnel up to heaven and hell to keep them distracted with their war, so they don't see what's going on down here. Getting that track too high is going to have consequences for everybody.
So what's that blue stuff in the corner over there?
Yeah, so this is the game piece that represents the etheria. So these are small gem-like pieces. And they serve as sort of an energy and a resource in the game, but it's also a resource that has to be paid through a tithe up to the Celestials. So players need to be careful about how much of that they spend and how much they save for that purpose.
So we've got here an angel and a demon who are, as Tom mentioned, this is something that's really kind of unusual about the Court of the Dead. They're both the bad guys, right, Tom? Yeah. They're collecting souls. Death is kind of enslaved to pass those along.
Yeah, in this universe there is no sort of default setting for goodness. Goodness is something you have to attain, just as you have to sort of, through your own choices, you choose to be evil. And there's sort of a big sort of self-determination ethic that kind of, ripples through the Court of the Dead all the way through. And you look at, just Death himself, sort of making the choice to decide to go, well, I got to go against the grain. I have to do something about this. And it plays into, all the way down into the sort of slowly growing populace of the underworld. It's always about this notion of self-determination, this kind of rise, conquer, rule kind of anthem that they have, which is aimed at sort of, upsetting this issue where heaven and hell are basically defining everything for everyone in their own selfish purposes or whatnot. And they are really ruled more by law and chaos, not good or evil. So everyone has a choice, and everyone's making theirs. The Celestials have made terrible ones and infected the universe for everyone else.
So Pat, how did you tackle? So players are looking for that self-determination, which is really to get their win for the game, right? So what are some of the choices that people have to balance that drive these meters up? So you're really choosing between a selfish action that's going to get you more points to win the game and have your vision of the underworld rebellion kind of come to life versus these meters which have negative consequences for all players, correctly?
What, do you want to talk about that one for a sec?
This guy over
here?
This
Dread Script?
Yeah. What's
well, when you were talking about the self-determination aspect of the thing, the issue, that's really another element of the stakes in Court of the Dead is not just the celestial, oppressor's oversight on things, but is the fact that this is an imperfect rebellion. That the Underworlders and Death himself were kind of created with a somewhat destructive nature, but they have a noble purpose that they're pursuing.
Because they're reapers, right? I mean, they're bringing souls through.
They were created for this purpose, and then they start to realize, whoa, this is a toxic and a wrong thing. We have to step against this. But their nature is got that sort of ever sort of drawing, sort of destructive purpose in its background, and so they all have to sort of fight their nature, which is represented by this thing called the Dread Script, which is basically just as it might imply, the sort of the grip of the destruction on your psyche.
Like a disease or the dark side of the force, kind of.
So when you have when you're vying for self-determination, an aspect of how we could put another sort of milestone or another rock in a hard place for this struggling rebellion was to show that they were not only fighting the big war on the big picture, but they're also fighting it within themselves. And the dread script then represents that use. So as they use Etheria and as they use power and express that, they have to be ever careful about how much they do so that it doesn't get out of hand, and then they too become corrupted. And this has always been sort of the all-taker, which is what Death is called in this story. Has always been his greatest fear, was that he would succumb to the same thing the Celestials did and blow this entire opportunity.
So
the track sort of represents the two sort of goalposts that sort of govern life in the underworld.
Let's focus now on the Celestial Suspicion Meter, because the first stretch goal we have in the campaign, if we fund within 48 hours, these Unity tokens here, which, if we could do a close-up, you can see these again is a prototype like Pat mentioned, but they're cardboard, but these will switch to a very beautiful kind of copper-colored metal.
Complete with that sort of currency tinkle as you run it through your
coins.
hands.
But how does this work with the Celestial Suspicion Meter, Pat? How does that get driven up, and what happens if it gets higher and higher?
Sure. So in general, when you're doing things that are for the greater good in this game, whether it be contributing towards the Celestial Tide and paying more than everyone else and giving up more of your Etheria, or some of the other game actions that let you both regulate this track and the dread script, those types of actions tend to earn you unity because you're contributing to the overall unity of the underworld and helping prepare for this ultimate battle against the Celestials. So earning those tokens is very important because they also score you points at the end of the game. So players have this desire to do what's best for the greater good while also managing some things like a hidden objective that is only known to them and will only score them points, doing things like recruiting more guild figures to their control. So doing what's best for everyone sometimes is an advantage, and as Tom talked about, having that struggle to sometimes do what's best for you at the downfall of everyone else is a struggle that players will feel throughout the game. And as you said, we're really excited to get these Unity tokens if we fund in the first 48 hours up to that nice, heavy, shiny metal that we can have in the game.
Awesome. Lacey, are we getting any questions through Facebook that we could have Pat and Tom answer?
Lots of comments. We do have some questions about the box art. Is this going to be available as a print? And who made this?
Oh, Tom, you want to talk about the box art?
So the box art is a great story. I mean, this is Alex Horley, who is a very well-known artist. He's done a ton of stuff for.
This is a prototype.
He's done a lot of stuff for music, Rob Zombie elements. He's done a lot for Blizzard, and so he's really got a deep rooting in kind of a dark fantasy ethic as well. We met at Comic-Con a few years back, hit it off, and his big, bold kind of imagination that just is unleashed on a canvas, literally with paint. This is like this is a traditional, a classic artisan, and so this is all oil and acrylic, and I mean, and as a painter myself, who I can work on 3D things, I can't do anything 2D, so this is almost like a magic trick for me, and he is definitely a wizard in that regard. As far as prints and such, we've done his 3 factional pieces. In all likelihood, this will eventually make its way into the portfolio.
And actually, if you tune in at around 1 o'clock, we're going to do a segment on what are the factions, and we're going to focus on one of the Kickstarter exclusive elements of this game, are sleeves by the same artist, done with each sort of faction prerogative. And we'll talk with Tom about who the factions are and who their leaders are, and Pat about how that element is incorporated within the game.
We have another question from JJ Joe. So the coins will be made metal only if the goal is reached within 48 hours?
That is correct, yes. If we're funded within 48 hours, the first thing that we unlock will be metal, which all stretch goals are included in every version of the game that backers back. Nice. And if you tune in a little bit later, I think we actually have a sample of one of the coins that Project Raygun produced that's making its way here to California, to Sideshow headquarters. So we should have a preview of what that will look like.
An armored car to move in.
Yeah, exactly. With the death in the back seat, kind of watching it make its way here. But we did want to give away a chronicle to someone. Again, this is the deeper mythology. It's sort of 50% art book, 50% Univis handbook. It really goes into in much deeper detail the story that Tom was kind of laying out at the beginning of this segment. Lacey, who's our
We
winner?
have a winner. It is Patrick Mukeberg.
Yeah, Patrick.
Woo! Welcome to the underworld, my friend. We will
Not
be
be
sending you
disappointed.
a chronicle. So please tune in throughout the day. Like I said, we're going to have a preview of the coin. We'll talk a little bit about the factions, look at some of the faction sleeve art. We'll get some more insider tips from Pat on how to play the game and win.
It's all about winning
Yeah.
or uniting.
Uniting the underworld. So thank you for joining us, and please, if you're interested in the game, go to sideshow.com/Kickstarter for more details of Court of the Dead Mourner's Call.